Okay, I want to close out this part of this mini lesson by showing you how to create some nice trees right on the horizon line right here that will add some interest to this horizon. It will also provide a nice even break between the sky and the snow. And then in the next lessons we'll work on down the painting. Now there are two different ways that you can lay these trees in. One way, this board is dry now, is to go ahead and use some more of that blue gray, but maybe more of the gray, and I can come in here and I can just touch the edge, make sure my edge is straight, but begin to touch in uneven ways and lift up into the paper with the pigment. I'm not scrubbing or anything. That needs to be a little bit darker so you can see it. And maybe I'll add a little bit more brown to that as well. Now let's see here. But I'm pushing the brush this way to create the illusion of trees, and I'm trying to keep that edge straight. We may have to go back with our flat brush in a minute, but you can see that I can just do an even stroke at the bottom and then pushing the brush up, create this illusion of the canopy of trees that might be in the back. And I like to have some places higher than others. You know, it just kind of creates more interest. Notice that by pushing this, it's still a fairly soft line that I've created. And then if I want to make sure that I have that line still very straight and flat, I can take this flat brush and just kind of straighten it out just a little bit, scrub it back and forth, and that will do it. Now that's one way to create a tree line. Let me touch this up here. Here's another way, and you'll notice when I do this, there's still, I'll call it a hard edge to the trees. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no detail to it because you can't see anything other than the general shape. And I'll come over here, and now I'm going to show you another way that you can create these trees that will maybe even make them softer and fan out more. To do that, I'll do that on this side. I'm going to take my brush, and with just plain water, I'm going to run right along the horizon like that. And this is the wet and wet technique. Same idea. Let me get some paint on my brush. Get it fairly thick. But now what happens? See what happens here. When I touch it, I just let it run up wherever it's going to run. I need a little bit more brown. Make that gray a little bit more brown gray. And if it's still water, I'm not going to pass the stroke of the wet brush that I put down, but if it's wet, and I have to watch, see that paper soaks up the water so fast that sometimes you have to do this twice to get that paper to be wet enough so it'll do what I'm telling you that I want it to do. I don't know if you can see this. I'll probably fix the tape so that it comes in closer at this point. But what's happening now, I'm just kind of daubing my brush along that line, but instead of it being a hard edge like this, you can see it's sort of feathering up. If that paper is good and wet, it will do that. And it creates a really nice soft tree line that way. This is a great technique. I've used this one a lot as well. And I can go back in at the base of the tree line. I can add more pigment if I want. Now notice I'm getting over here where I'm out of the water, and so what's happening? I'm getting those harder edges again. There's nothing wrong with that as long as that's what you want. But if you want that soft edge, let me come back in here and demonstrate it again so that you can see the difference. I'm going to come in here with some water like this. While that is still wet, I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to touch it and let that pigment run up. Notice it won't run down into the snow area because that part of the board is dry. And so it really is a nice way of fanning out the paint, and yet it's still coming to the nail. Look how nicely that is wicking up into the paper and creating that illusion of a tree line. I really do like this wet into wet technique. So I've done two different ways for you on the paper here, and you can select the one that is the way you want to do it. I'm going to clean up that edge just a little bit. But I have painted on the dry paper, and I can create the illusion of the tops of the trees with my brush strokes like this. Over here I have wet paper, and I'm just dropping the pigment in. I'm going to drop a little bit more at the bottom now that that's getting lighter. Sometimes I'll come back on these, and I'll just at the very bottom, I make the bottom of the tree a little bit darker than the top of it. And you can see where some of that water got over that line. I'm just going to clean that up with a brush that I've wiped against a towel, and just take that right back like that. Alright, so here are two different types of trees. Gray or gray-brown, depends on how much blue and how much brown you add, but you either get these nice little tree patterns here that have a harder edge, or you can create these softer tree patterns that just kind of flare up into the sky using the wet and the wet technique. We're going to stop this lesson here at this point, and then when we get back together, I'm going to show you how to create these other areas where there are bushes or trees, but also begin to create some of the shadow in the snow. And we're going to work on these ridge areas here where we could have some trees or some scrub bushes or something. I think it's neat in the country the way the countryside is divided up, especially noticeable in the snow. All these little valleys and so on might have some growth in them, and yet the snow has covered the fields, and so you get these broken patterns. One of the things I like to do now, so that the snow is the brightest at the top of these ridges, is to think of the light as coming in this way or coming in this way. And because this is on a slope and it's sloping away from the light, the edges, the top edges might be bright, but down here in the valleys, the snow has a little bit different color. It's not in shadow necessarily. It could be with clouds, but it works out really well if I will take these areas and define these lines so that I'm putting a little bit more shadow on the snow right up to the edge of those lines. And then when I put the bushes on these ridges, it really gives it a contour. It makes it look like, in fact, that area is actually rounded. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to take, in this case, I'll take my round brush. You could use your flat brush. And I'm going to carefully, and I mean carefully, outline that line again. In fact, let's use the flat because I can get more water on there at one time. And I'm going to come up here. I got to be careful I don't go into my tree line. That's why I was using the round a minute ago. But I want the pigment of the paint, in this case, to be running right down to this first ridge line, but not over it. Now, we're going to use this wet into wet technique again, just like I've been showing you. And as long as all of this is wet as well, when we draw that line with that blue area there, let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm putting a little water on my brush. I've already got water in my paint, and this is where I want to kind of spread it out. I want to get a lot of water here. I don't want it to be very dark. So I'm adding a lot of water to this, and I'm just going to lightly go on this space right here, right against that line. That water should not cross that line, but it should allow this shadow to wick up into that upper area where I already have water. Now let me come over here just quickly. And this is why it needs to be wet. Now, you'll notice, see how this line here is getting soft? I might even go up here like this to find that a little bit more. But you can see now it's beginning to add some contour to that snowy field. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I don't need a lot, but I just need enough to make that. And we're going to have some bushes here anyway. That's why I'm making this just a little bit darker. Notice how it makes that snow, the white of the board, almost seem golden again. It's just amazing how this can work. All right, now what will happen once that dries, we will be able to put some bushes in here, and then that field is going to look like it's rolling there. We have another line here we could probably go ahead and do together. I'm going to get I'm going to get water, carefully go at the edge of that line and let the board get wet a little bit more. Got to be careful over on that one side, but again, mixing this water here, if I just touch it and let that wet into wet pigment work its way up, you'll have a nice soft shadow line without having hard edges. If you start getting hard edges, wet your brush, go ahead and feather it in. See, we got some wet hard edges there. I'm just going to come back with just wet paint, excuse me, with just water, a wet brush, and I'll try to pull it back down. You know, if you have some hard edges, that's okay, but I just like on shadows to have as soft an edge as I can. All right. Now, let's say that I have more blue there than I want, and I want to lift some of that out. I'll take a Q-tip, and as long as I am not scrubbing, I can lift out some of that and make that blend a little bit better. I just don't want to scrub. I don't want to lift any of the paper off. All right. You can't ever lift the paint back completely to white, but you know, if I keep using a clean Q-tip, I can get a lot of that pigment lifted back out. All right. Now we're going to let this dry, and then we're going to put in the bushes. So let's take just a minute for me to hit it with a hairdryer, and we'll be right back.